we use that as a kind of impetus to discuss a broader set of ideas. Anyways, I give the floor to you, Vanessa, or the screen, whatever we're doing, the desk.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if I sit to say hi to my colleagues who are on the other side of the Atlantic, or if I stand, but I'll just stand in the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for those who are on the other side of the Atlantic, either basking in the sun or freezing under the rain, as we currently are here in Delft. My name is Vanessa Grossman. I'm a Brazilian architect, a historian, a curator whose research addresses architecture intersections with ideology and governance, with a spatial focus on global practices in Cold War era Europe and Latin America. It is my great joy to host this hybrid symposium at the Berlage Center for Advanced Studies in Architecture and Urban Design, which is part of the Delft University of Technology's Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment, where I have the pleasure to be an assistant professor since 2020. So first and foremost, I would like to thank the Berlage, and in particular its Director of Studies, Salomon Frosto, who made not only this event possible, but also the proseminar, of which this event is part, named under the same title, Architecture, Nature in the Americas, the work of Paulo Mendes da Rocha. I'm currently co-teaching this course to the excellent Berlage students together with Jean-Louis Cohen and Jesse Verduz, who is here as well, who is a Berlage alum. And thanks to Jesse, please raise your hand. These students and I are learning about the conceptual material art of model making through contemporary techniques and technologies. And I also think Juan Benavides, where is he? He's there, who actually helped us put together this event and disseminate it. So I take this opportunity to start by welcoming and introducing Jean-Louis Cohen at the Berlage and TU Delft, where he is in fact a rather regular presence as a guest professor, speaker, critic, doctoral advisor, and members of numerous committees and PhD defenses. Jean-Louis is not only a dear professor, but a collaborator with whom I have the greatest pleasure to once more work together as co-curator and co-editor of a thick catalog, with contributions including, as a matter of fact, all the speakers at the symposium, who in their turn are not only authors in the book, but major interlocutors in this research project. I will, however, remind you of a few of Jean-Louis Cohen's countless research projects and outputs. Jean-Louis Cohen is an architect, a historian, a curator with a long track record in research on modern architecture and city planning. Since 1994, he holds the Sheldon H. Solow Chair for the History of Architecture at New York University's Institute of Fine Arts. He has been a curator for numerous exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art, the Canadian Centre for Architecture, the Centre Georges Pompidou, the Cité de l'Architecture et du Patrimoine, and the Maxi, and now Casa da Arquitectura. The most significant among the 40 books he has published are Building a New World, Americanism in Russian Architecture, 2020, Le Corbusier, An Atlas of Modern Landscapes, 2013, Interferences, Deutschland, Frankreich, Architektur, 1800, 2000, my German is really bad, and The Future of Architecture since 1889, not to miss Architecture in Uniform, Designing and Building for World War II, Mies van der Rohe, Casablanca, Colonial Myths, and Architectural Ventures. There are many more, but I won't take any longer. So almost 2 years ago, we embarked in this curatorial and editorial adventure. We were commissioned to curate a major retrospective exhibition on the work of Paulo Mendes da Rocha, back when the architect was still alive and had donated 8,800 items of his archive to one of the few institutions on the planet exclusively dedicated to architectural archives, exhibitions, and publications, the Casa da Arquitectura in Matosinhos, Portugal. We named this exhibition, which will open in May 2023, Constructed Geographies, Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Despite receiving a series of institutional accolades worldwide, Paulo Mendes da Rocha's work is still largely overlooked and deserves further interpretation. The exhibition considers the work of Mendes da Rocha within his geographic approach to the Americas and the planet at large, and concerns the social and anthropogenic impact of the continent's development, which is deeply embedded in its colonial and post-colonial past. Thanks to the Berlage, this also became an opportunity to engage in a conversation with 15 students who are already postmasters, young architects and urban designers, through a critical reflection about Paulo Mendes da Rocha's work. The proseminar was conceived as a hybrid of a history seminar and a model-making workshop where students discuss literature for various disciplines, consult first-hand documents at Casa da Arquitectura, and we do so in view of contemporary debates about the legacy and fate of modern architecture, what I call Latin American modernisms, debates about the invention of the Americas, the technologies and languages of concrete and steel, and a discussion about rivers and urban culture. We consider the designs of Paulo Mendes da Rocha not only from the standpoint of different theoretical and historical perspectives, but most importantly, of Mendes da Rocha's own words. They have recently been published, some of which even translated into English, thanks to the editorial work, largely thanks to the editorial work of Guilherme Wisnik, who is here with us today. The students were thus asked to write research papers and conceive and produce sectional models of 7 of Mendes da Rocha's projects out of the 12 works that are the backbone of the exhibition in Porto. These sectional models will have a central presence at the exhibition, whose designs were entrusted to other major interlocutors in this project, architects Eduardo Souto de Moura and Nuno Graça Moura. The exhibition graphic design is the work of Lisa Ramalho and Arthur Rebelo, founding partners of R2. It is just a personal joy for me to reconsider the very legacy of Paulo Mendes da Rocha's works and worldview, within which I was educated as an architect at the University of São Paulo, although he was no longer there, he had already retired, through a dialogue with the worldview of a younger generation. The Berlage students seem to be struck by Mendes da Rocha's optimistic faith in human creative determination. For young designers, this is certainly an important ethos. I personally expect that this will be one of the messages of the exhibition and its catalog, and of events like this one. Therefore, to expand our in-class discussions and allow us to publicly engage, together with the students, with other interlocutors, as part of this big research and curatorial project, we organize this hybrid afternoon symposium, which happens both in real life and online. With this conversation, we expect to challenge prevailing narratives about the contribution of the so-called Global South to modern architecture by focusing on Latin America through the work of Paulo Mendes da Rocha. The specificity of Latin America's modernity stems, as anthropologist Arturo Escobar has pointed out, from the social and temporal heterogeneity as the product of different cultural temporalities of pre-modern, modern, and even anti-modern and a-modern forms emerging and coexisting at the same time. A core objective of this symposium is to discuss the forms and methods that have shaped and have been shaped by Latin American culture and nature as envisioned by Paulo Mendes da Rocha. Topics will include the architect's drawings and paper models, the centrality of architectural section drawings among Paulista architects, an interest in modern technologies, the return to the historical figure of the Homo faber, and the pleasure of invention. Paulo Mendes da Rocha is certainly more known for his built and unbuilt work than for his writings. He was not a prolific writer, but his speeches and vivid Socratic interactions with a myriad of interlocutors about the chief themes that traversed his work and life ethics offer a fundamental clé de lecture to interpret the epistemologies and ethic orientation of his practice. His worldview engages a passion for water and an awareness about the global water system, a mindful and inventive approach to the Earth's matter and natural resources, the relation between nature and culture, including a political rhetoric vis-a-vis issues referred to by Brazilian anthropologist Darcy Ribeiro as the civilizational process of the American peoples. That is, how the peoples of the Americas have culturally proceeded through their contact with nature, mediated by chief technological revolutions toward urbanization and development, a continental consciousness, a major concern for the Americas, including a mixture of fascination and repulsion for the so-called Age of Discovery. Today, the Age of Discovery is amended as the Plantationocene or Anthropocene, the era of human dominance and shaping of the planet's ecological and climate systems, which was highly engineered through European colonialism, empire, and slavery. Mendes da Rocha did harbor a great fondness for craftsmanship, design, construction, which he pursued through a master of building techniques in close collaboration with engineers around the medium specificity of his built work in reinforced concrete and metallic structures. And yet his concerns translate into a disciplinary understanding of architecture, less as the art of construction than as a peculiar means of mobilizing knowledge, and I'm quoting him here, about the built environment and the planet. In fact, many of these interests and thoughts, such as his praise of the mental conception of the size of the world, lay at the heart of contemporary debates in architecture and interrelated fields, especially regarding that what sociologist and anthropologist Bruno Latour designated as the new climate regime and ecological mutation of unprecedented scale. Mendes da Rocha enunciated this approach by proclaiming geography as the primary and most primordial of architectures. What does it mean to declare geography as first and foremost architecture? And architecture is a means for disaster prevention, which was some of his current disciplinary definitions. Mendes da Rocha nurtured was Brazilian philosopher and art and architecture critic Sofia da Silva Telles called a geographic imagination, which belongs to a lineage that refers to Le Corbusier's vision of South America landscape in precision, and the notion of geoarchitecture that the Swiss-French architect later articulated in the three human establishments. According to Harshim Sarkis, in 2029, Le Corbusier had skipped over the city to discover geography and the world. For Sarkis, while geography provides a spatial and temporal constant, the emergent field of human geography provided Le Corbusier the much-needed grounding for the rapidly transforming cities. Throughout his career, Mendes da Rocha developed in his turn an idiosyncratic vision of architecture and design aiming to take hold of a continent-sized country where the natural world, that is the geographic, characterized by vastness, a sense of abundance, and a purported emptiness, is so present through controversial linkages between the physical and the human, land grabbing and social environmental injustice. Mendes da Rocha's geographic consciousness was at work at the scale of houses and apartment buildings, set in dialogue with São Paulo's topography, and large volumes addressing Brazil's majestic landscapes and longest inter- and subtropical coastline in the world. It froze. I finished my introductory notes with more images of the Gerber House, which Paulo Mendes da Rocha designed in 1973 for filmmaker Raquel Gerber and her husband, the engineer Inácio Gerber in Angra dos Reis, in my home state of Rio de Janeiro, one of the New World seascapes that is so dear to the Brazilian architect. These are stills from a film that were commissioned to two architects, Ciro Miguel, who will speak today, and Felipe de Ferrari, and they will be presented as an important component of the exhibition. I thus welcome everyone to this event, in particular the speakers whom I will properly introduce before their respective interventions, colleagues and students from the Berlage, TU Delft, and hopefully other institutions in every corner of the earth who can join us virtually, engaging with us in minds and hearts. With no further ado, I pass the word and floor to Jean-Louis Cohen.
Yes, many thanks, dear Vanessa. Good afternoon, everyone. I won't be very long today. Vanessa, I think, has already built very well the stage of this conversation, which turns around the personality and the work of the man you see on this picture on the construction site of this Seschi 24 di Maio, which is cultural center in São Paulo, which will be largely discussed later today. For me, this image is very important. It shows us an architect who's, unlike his Brazilian colleague and elder, Oscar Niemeyer, who hardly went to a construction site during his entire career, except perhaps in Brasilia. He was not only a designer, a gifted designer, an obstinate designer, but he was also a builder and someone who was deeply engaged with construction, with structure, as Guy Nordenson will explain us later today. So for me, it's the opportunity of this exhibition is both exciting and very sad. The initial project was to work with Paulo, who died expectedly, I would say, in the spring in April 2021. So we're left with the traces of his life and work. which is an immense archive kept in Porto, and which created Matosinhos, which is a city, I would say, the working class fishing neighborhood of Porto. He left his archive in Portugal, which created an political obligation, as we might wonder why this show takes place in Porto and not in São Paulo. The archive is in Porto because of Paulo's desire to give it to this institution and not to other Brazilian institutions. It was probably a good idea because architectural archives tend to burn in Brazil. The National Museum in Rio has burned. The Archive of Architecture at the University Federal do Rio has burned. Others might have been flooded. So the archive is safe in Porto, and in a way pushes up to a reinterpretation of Paulo's work on the base of his drawings, of his models. He was a great model maker. On the base of his numerous statements, Paulo was, as Vanessa has said before, he was deeply engaged in Socratic conversations. He never really, he wrote letters, but he never left entire books. He left some essays and hundreds of conversations which have been partly transcribed. So also very good videos and films. So we are able in this show, and we'll look at some of this today, of rediscovering the persona of Paulo, also through his statement and not only through his building. So if I were to characterize his work, and I will not paraphrase what Vanessa has already said and what will be the substance of the big catalog we are editing right now with all contributions of many of the speakers today, all the speakers today. I won't paraphrase Vanessa, but the double concept of the exhibition needs to be underlined again, construction and geography. And Vanessa has been very eloquent about this notion of geography, and I will allow myself to read only one quote of Mendes da Rocha, which is extremely telling. He wrote, declared, geography, in my opinion, is the primary and most primordial of architectures. Before he built, man selected a place in which he foresaw an architectural situation imposed on space. Here he will found a city. In this estuary, and Paulo loved estuaries, we will build a port. The notion of a projection of this universe of human installations presupposes an idea of building based on the initial configuration that lies in geography and its necessary transformation. So geographies at various scales, and the very concept of the exhibition, which will open in May, and of the book, is not a chronological one. There was a danger, which I will call the Charybdis danger chronology, which, as Balzac has written, is history practiced by idiots. So no chronology and no typology, which was Scylla, the other danger, no typology, but instead a discussion of Paulo's architectural problematics, of Paulo's architectural ideas as transcribed in buildings which go from the darkest houses where the inhabitants are protected from the tropical sun to the open horizons of these projects at geographic scale. So the narrative we're telling is one of the work which starts in the dark and opens up to the world, opens up, as we've seen with a beautiful house in Angra dos Reis, opens up to the landscape, to the sea, to water, and to the world. So this process will be documented by the exhibition. At the same time, Paulo's work is constructed, it's built. Paulo was trained, this is really important, not at the University of São Paulo, but at the Presbyterian University created by Canadians in the late 19th century, São Paulo, the Mackenzie University, where technology, engineering was the leading discipline. And it was an interesting school, which was a mix of the two major systems which have been in the center of architectural education until the Bauhaus, which were the engineering school model, polytechnic school model, and the Beaux-Arts school model. So Mackenzie was both created by a Beaux-Arts trained a Brazilian architect who had been in Philadelphia. He had exactly the same training as Louis Kahn in Philadelphia, but infiltrated by engineers. And this education was fundamental in Paulo Mendes da Rocha's understanding of structure. And just one last word, I don't want to be too long. One last word. Very often, we're fighting in this project against cliches, against the cliche of Brazilian architecture reduced to the carioca, to the people from Rio, like Di Meyer or Reidi, and I'm not disputing their skill, their genius, or Brazilian or Paulista architecture reduced to the cliche of brutalism, and which, as I remember everyone here, has nothing to do with brutality, but has something to do with the brute character of rough concrete. So Paulo has used concrete in a sophisticated manner, which could be referred to many Brazilian sources, but also to the ideas of Auguste Perret, who developed the architecture of reinforced concrete in the early 20th century. And this is an hypothesis I would like to maybe to develop further later today. But in being a brutalist, if we accept I would say the scholarly grounded definition of this term, one character of Paulo for me is absolutely dominant and should guide us and guides us in this project. And this character is what I would use here a very rather obsolete and tainted term. Paulo was elegance personified as a person in his daily manners and behavior, in his relationship towards the elders, the contemporaries, the younger architects and people with whom he developed his later work, in close cooperation, his later works. Paulo was all about elegance in his person and in his architecture. He managed to produce, he was a dancer, and he managed to produce what I would call dancing concrete. And this was not a minor achievement. Thank you.
There's no echo? No. Okay, so the way I thought of organizing it is that we have two presentations and then we can open up for questions and remarks, and then we have a break, then two more presentations, and then we have a final conversation. Does it work for you? Yeah? Okay, so I will introduce our first guest speaker, who I'm very happy to welcome, Guy Nordenson, who is in real life with us today after an excellent keynote lecture at the Berlage yesterday, who is a structural engineer and professor of architecture and structural engineer at Princeton University, my alma mater. He studied at MIT and the University of California at Berkeley, and began his career as a draftsman in the joint studio of Buckminster Fuller and Isamu Noguchi in Long Island City in 1976. In 1987, he established the New York office of Ove Arup and Partners and was its director until 1997, when he began his independent practice. In 1994, he co-founded the Structural Engineers Association of New York. Guy Nordenson was the engineer of the most incredible construction site, as we've seen yesterday, such as the Santa Fe Opera House, the Toledo Glass Pavilion, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and the International African American Museum and Emmanuel Nye Memorial in Charleston, South Carolina. Recent projects include the Museum of Fine Arts expansion, Glasgow School of Art, Rice Moody Center, Menil Drawing Institute, and Rothko Chapel restoration. All in Houston, Texas. Guy Nordenson has had a decades-long relationship with the MoMA, including co-curating the 2004 exhibition Tall Buildings, which he showed us yesterday, and publishing the book Tall Buildings, 7 Structural Engineers, the Felix Candela Lectures, 2008. Tall Buildings was in 2004, and Structured Lineages, Learning from Japanese Design, Structural Design, 2019. The sponsored research project On the Water, Palisade Bay, from 2010, served as the inspiration and research for the 2010 MoMA exhibition Rising Currents, co-curated with Barry Bergdahl. Nordenson was a commissioner of the New York City Public Design Commission and a member of the New York City Panel on Climate Change, and is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Science at the National Academy of Engineering. Guy Nordenson is a contributor of the forthcoming exhibition catalog of constructed geographies. He is a great interlocutor for us in this project. And as soon as we commissioned his essay, he took a plane to Brazil and really visited many of Paulo Mendes da Rocha's projects, largely thanks to Caterine Otondo. So I thank you, Guy, for being here with us today.
Okay, if I sit down. So I'm going to read a section of the essay that I contributed to the catalog, just focusing on one particular aspect of what I was studying in the work of Mendes da Rocha. But before I do, I'd like to just introduce an idea about him. I think when we look at the structure of modern architecture, there are many instances where we see that there is a collaboration that takes place between an architect and an engineer, both of whom contribute to the final outcome of the project. It's often difficult to make sense of that because much of what we read in the literature and much of what we hear from architects and engineers tends to obscure the truth and the reality of those collaborations. If you think about Auguste Commandant and Louis Kahn, both writing about their work, sometimes poetically, sometimes in Commandant's case, somewhat bitterly, you can't really get to the heart of what happened in those collaborations, Piano and Rice, etc. There are other situations where there's very much of a hierarchical relationship between a formal strategy and design and the execution of that through the intervention of a number of technicians, all of whom are there really to make it happen, but not necessarily to modify the idea. What I found in Mendes da Rocha was not any evidence that I could see of those kinds of productive collaborations that you see with Piano and Rice or with other pairings that we can look at historically, but actually somebody who seemed to have a pretty clear understanding of the materiality and the form of structures and was able to manipulate it in a way that, to my eye at least, is poetic in the sense that it plays with the expectation that I would bring to reading some of these projects. So he would do things that were a little bit unexpected. He would take a wall on the side of a house that looked like maybe it was carrying the edge of the house, but in fact it was floating and hanging off the roof. So there's poetry and there's humor in the way in which he manipulated structure, which I very much enjoyed, sometimes seeing it only when I visited it. The other aspect was his relationship to craftsmen. Catherine Otondo mentioned to me the formwork at his own house, at Mendes da Rocha's own house, which had been built by a craftsman, the name of whom we still haven't quite pinned down, but who did cabinetry that was the basis of the formwork of these very, very thin walls and very thin edges to the building, including chamfers that I took photographs of that are really quite beautiful and sympathetic to what Mendes da Rocha was trying to achieve. So he managed to establish a dialogue with these craftsmen, work with them on several occasions, and get them to enhance the poetry of his concrete work. So I tried to illustrate that in my essay, and I'll just start with the first part of the essay today. That's the Mube. And I think that's Kate on the left.
Yes, looks like
Okay. The photograph of the Brazilian Museum of Sculpture, captured by Nelson Kahn and Andres Otero, is taken late in the day. The yellow sunlight cuts diagonally below the structure. The long span box beam, or stone in the sky, bears down on the image, covering the top half. Kahn and Otero have positioned the bearings that support the large 60-meter span at the center of the square format. All the vertical lines, from the palm trees to the railing posts, align in parallel, indicating a large format tilt lens or digital post-processing. Thin handrails trace across and through the image, razor thin, strictly drawn and choreographed lines. The photo is ubiquitous. For many that have not been able to visit, it is the iconic image of Mendes da Rocha's masterpiece. It is also a brilliant framing and a subtle reading of his architecture. Based in Sao Paulo, Mendes da Rocha crafted both the construction and representation of his work to frame a consistent and always succinct expression of his art. His freehand sketches and drawings are all controlled and specific. The influence of Le Corbusier and Niemeyer drawings are clear, but to my eye, his drawings are more precise and pure. Mendes da Rocha always included the horizon or land. The marks are singular and appear to be made in one stroke. Like Giacometti, Mendes da Rocha always delineated the frame, a boundary, and a context for his subject. Mendes da Rocha emphasized the landforming root of architecture, the reconfiguration of geography. He stated, quote, "I necessarily confuse engineering and architecture. When the architect scribbles a formal annotation, a sketch on paper, he summons all the necessary know-how. The lines that define the Brazil Pavilion at Osaka Expo 70, for example, marry the landform and the perched structure, each reaching for the other, and both well-defined even in the sketch." Daniel Pisani writes, "During his years living with his father, an important engineer of ports and bridges, Mendes da Rocha developed a tragic and heroic idea of the possibilities that are inherent in human work, as well as the need to put them to good use by transforming brute nature into what he used to call a city for all, a matter of carving the soil time and time again with a modesty, precision, and scientific intelligence, and the scientific intelligence of the engineer." This tragic and heroic idea extends from the personal to the national and international. In his 1962 Guide to Modern Architecture, Rainer Banham notes that in Brazil, quote, Le Corbusier inspired a group of young or youngish architects to create the first national style of modern architecture, style that has been the envy of the world, with smooth surface sometimes, and the simple geometry when it feels like it, carried to a degree of freedom so marked and so personal. From Costa to Niemeyer to Hegi to Burle Marx, Artigas and Mendes da Rocha, this, quote, national style, this inscription or geographic of architecture on the territory has also had tragic environmental impacts. The brute nature of Brazil, marked by colonization, urban sprawl, and Western immigration, is to this day more brutalized than transformed. And yet, something about the work of these architects presents the influential optimism of a city for all that might be forged of this incursion and exploitation. There's a double meaning in the attribution of, quote, the modesty, precision, and scientific intelligence of the engineer. This characterization reflects the instrumental Corbusian idea of the engineer as noble savage, healthy and virile, active and useful, balanced and happy in their work. I like that. I wake up every morning, healthy and virile, active and useful, balanced and happy in my work. It also obscures the dominant alliance of capital and infrastructure through which engineers, like Mendes da Rocha's father, guided the transforming of brute nature. And yet modesty and precision do aptly describe Mendes da Rocha's own intelligence and craft, as I've witnessed at his house, at Mube and later projects. The play of lines, sharp and thin, the planes and smooth surfaces of slabs and carved ground, the formworking and land forming all take part in the production of both a precisely crafted physical presence and the framing of images that represent his work to a global public, of architects and critics that may never be able to visit them in the Southern Hemisphere. At MUBE, the visitor's experience is both grounded and surreal. The stone in the sky hovers above the site, connoting a kind of transcendence. The beam seems to invert gravity so that a visitor feels afloat in the gap between it and the concrete sculptured platforms and galleries descending below. This inversion negates the sense that one is going down into the museum and is reinforced by the sunlight reflected from a channel of water into the offices and gallery. The drama of the 60-meter span is heightened by its hollowness, as seen in the photograph here and the one that I started with, and especially by its apparent horizontality. One expects structures that are long and thin to visibly sag under their own weight. The MUBE beam is flat, even slightly crowned, thanks to the post-tensioning of the concrete eye girders within. These post-tensioning cables are embedded in these I-beams and follow a curved drape profile down from the ends to the middle and back up, balancing the self-weight of the structure. The quote, smooth surface and simple geometry of MUBE concrete covers the hidden matrix of cables and reinforcing bars that enables the stone in the sky to defy gravity and hover like a horizon. There's a drawing of a typical reinforced concrete bent of the 1955 Museo de Arte Moderna of Heiji and Carmen Portillo in Rio's Parque do Flamengo. Like an X-ray, the drawing reveals the delicate lines of the internal steel reinforcing bars cast into the concrete. This three-dimensional weaving of steel is only briefly visible during the construction process. The great engineers of the mid-20th century, Maillard, Nervi, Doroja, and Arup, among others, drew these lines on paper to intercept the anticipated internal tensions that would otherwise crack or fracture the concrete. Plastic concrete in this way is stitched indirectly by the engineer tracing the vector of forces. I don't doubt that Mendes da Rocha and his mentor Artigas, to them, the published drawings of the MAM reinforced, most likely, this drawing I think was done by H.'s wife, Carmen Portillo, were highly evocative and compelling as images. Within the figural cutout of the planar frame or bent, these curvilinear tension lines portray a lyricism contained, penta. The play of the razor-thin handrails against the hard-edged surfaces and volumes of concrete that appear often in Mendes da Rocha's work could be read as evocations by him of these hidden figures, both the figure of the architect's drawings and the framing lines of the structure. Thank you.
I don't know if
This is live, but
yeah. Yeah, she said I was stuck in this image.
well, it's I'm recording the lecture, so it's loaded.
Okay. All right. So can I?
Yeah.
I'm very happy to welcome and introduce Guilherme Wisnik, who is a full professor at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism of the University of São Paulo, which is also my alma mater, an institution of which he is now the vice director, very recent, and I congratulate him for the position. He is the author of many books, such as Lúcio Costa from 2001, and more recently, Dentro do Nevoeiro, Arte, Arquitetura e Tecnologia Contemporâneas from 2018, and Lançar Mundos no Mundo, Caetano Veloso e o Brasil from 2022. He received the Outstanding 2018 Award from the Brazilian Association of Art Critics in 2019. Guilherme Wisnik has published essays in several national and international books and magazines, such as Cahiers d'Art, Art Forum, Architectural Design, Architectural Review, Domus, Arquitectura Viva, Ave Monografias, Studi, Racenia, Archiplus, and many others. He has a prolific career as a curator of exhibitions within and outside of Brazil, such as more recently constructed landscape, São Paulo and Burle Marx in 2022, and Infinite Span, 90 years of Brazilian architecture, also at Casa da Arquitectura in Portugal in 2018. Guilherme Wisnik was the general curator of the 10th São Paulo Architecture Biennale in 2013, and of the Brazilian Pavilion at the Expo 2020 in Dubai in 2021. Guilherme Wisnik was not only a student of Paulo Mendes da Rocha, who has regularly contributed with the architect, but has been a veritable protagonist in the publication, exhibition, and dissemination of Mendes da Rocha's work, well beyond Brazilian borders. It is my great pleasure to welcome Guilherme Wisnik at the Berlage in TU Delft.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation to be here. Thanks for Berlage and TU Delft. And also thank you, Vanessa and Jean-Louis Cohen, for the invitation to write an essay to the catalog of the exhibition you are preparing for Casa da Arquitectura, and inviting me to write about this issue that is the detail and the design in Mendes da Rocha's work. Let me share my screen with you. Is it okay? Are you seeing? So, and with this title that you proposed, Vanessa, and it is perfect for me, Homo faber versus Homo ludens, the practice of detail in Mendes da Rocha's work, for sure. This is the challenge you and Jean-Louis proposed to me to think about in this essay, and it's a new issue for me because I wrote on many issues about Mendes da Rocha, but not the design and not the detail. So it's a great opportunity to share it with you, all of you here today, and discuss it. So let's begin. This is a photo of his table in his office in São Paulo, where we can see wire sculptures and pendulums built by him, by his hand. So looking at these objects and the whole environment of his office, we can think about, are we facing a serious scientist or a crazy inventor? So of course, I'm thinking about the polarity of the engineer and the bricoleur developed by Lévi-Strauss in La Pensée Sauvage, where he creates this polarity of, by one side, the engineer who creates machines and works with rationality, and on the other side, the bricoleur who works with the hand and with the fantasy and in a more ludic way. So in this sense, we can ask about Mendes da Rocha. Are we facing an engineer or a bricoleur? Of course, Mendes da Rocha belongs to an engineering tradition in São Paulo and in Brazil. As Jean-Louis explained in his speech, he studied in Mackenzie University, where the course of architecture comes from Beaux-Arts, not by engineering, but he was a son of a great engineer in Brazil. So Paulo had the influence of his father and the friends of the father and the harbor of Vitória, his birthplace in Espírito Santo, and the landscape of the harbor and the machines. And in a second moment, he was very influenced by Vila Nova Artigas and by the Paulista School of Architecture, who is connected to the Brutalism. So the architecture of Mendes da Rocha is for sure connected to this huge weightness of concrete structures, and in a certain way, as the language of the brutalism, the erasing of details and the erasing of design in the sense of the design as a bourgeois fetish in a way. But at the same time, we can think about, I'm quoting Paulo, this is a very famous phrase by him, where he says, it's impossible to think of formal transformations if one doesn't know how to carry them out. We think with the possible technique. We don't think with autonomous forms or independent of a factory vision of themselves. So this is the Homo faber, okay? This is the paradigm of the Homo faber. And in many times, we see Paulo thinking this way. So it's radical. You cannot imagine a form if you don't know how to build it. So the knowledge of building is necessary for the imagination, because if you don't know how to build, you cannot imagine. So, of course, this is the faith in the technique. So this is the Homo faber as the definition of the human, because if we are talking about Homo faber against Homo ludens, we are asking for what defines the human. So this is a long discussion. What defines the human? Is the faber or the ludens? So is the technique, or is the fantasy, or the joy of the play and the arts? And we see in the work and even in the discourse of Mendes da Rocha, this kind of paradox and polarity. Sometimes the faber, sometimes the ludens. And his design for the window of Butantan house, his own house in São Paulo, is maybe the protagonist of this story, because it's at the same time a masterpiece of engineer and bricoleur work. Because, of course, being close to Artigas and the Paulista School, Paulo was close to the Communist Party discourse and the faith in the technique of developing the country. So the industry of concrete, the economy of the industrialization, the perspective of prefabrication. But at the same time, Paulo was very realistic in admitting that we didn't have this industry. So what we had this special men who can work with their hands fabricating. So locksmith, no, this man, half artisanal, half industrial, manipulating steel structure, manipulating glass, rubber. So Paulo, in the sense, deals with these two sides of mentality, industry and craftsmanship. And when we look at this steel frame, this structure for the window of his house, is a perfect design where he creates a possibility of open all the windows at the same time. This is a photo of the house. In fact, these are twin houses, one for his family and the other one for the sister. Caterine knows very well. She was a neighbor of this house. And this is a photo of houses under construction. But what we see is exactly the goal of this architecture, that is the possibility of open everything. When you open the windows, it's a big hole. You don't see even a structure, because the position or the center of gravity of the window is in the position of open. So when you just unlock it, it opens and you don't have any remains in the concrete wall. So it's only the empty space. So it's a big plane of light, permitting that the light enters in the space without any interference of steel structure, nothing, just the concrete and the air. So in this sense, we can ask again, is the architect someone who is building, who is a faber in the sense of the human is defined by our thumb of the hand that permits us to fabricate tools for transforming nature, or the human is defined by our capacity of inventing new things as art, as fantasy, as we find in the graves with treasures in the prehistory, for example. So many times we could find Paulo defending the Homo faber, but we can also look at the other side. Here, for example, another quoting by him. What would be the supreme goal of architecture? I will tell you. It is to support the unpredictability of life. If I know that the subway passes the same place every 3 minutes, I'm not in a hurry to meet my friend. I can go to the bar for a beer. This is linked to the freedom of decisions. It's a highly creative, active life. Another question, what is the purpose of architecture? It's allowing us to talk. So here we are on the side of Homo ludens, right? It's not concerning technique, it's more concerning unpredictability of life, or uncertainty. And Paulo, I had the great pleasure to be close to him. I was a student, he was my professor. After that, I could work with him in his office and write some essays about him. And I liked to play with him in a jokes. So asking him, so are you faber or ludens? Please tell me. If he had to decide, he says, I'm faber. But the truth is, this other side of ludens appeared much and much more during the 90s and during the 2000s, with the critique of the modern paradigm of life. But coming back to the very beginning of his career, here we see 2 chairs designed by him in 1956. 2 different chairs for a store of interior design in Rua Augusta in São Paulo. And one was successful, you know it probably, this is Paulistano chair, this with one frame of steel continuous. But the other one, a flexible one, it was abandoned. But the fact is, Paulo in the beginning of his career was more designing interiors. So working for details exactly in the side of the design, because this was the tradition in Mackenzie School where he studied. And of course, he was a young architect trying to survive. But we can also see that he, in designing chairs, for example, he never designed a wooden chair, because for him, the wood it was a symbol of the picturesque style, some not urban way of building in São Paulo, connected to a romantic vision of nature. So he was really trying to impulse the industrialization with steel frames and iron. So very different from our tradition in Brazil of furnitures by wood. here is Alzupin, but we can think about Tenreiro, we can think about Sérgio Rodrigues, all of them designing wooden chairs. And when Paulo was invited by Artigas to be a professor in FAUSP and in participating in this movement of Paulista School, one of the aspects of this conception or this vision of architecture was exactly Artigas' vision coming from the Communist Party, that design was a kind of bourgeois fetish, as I said. So you must not design objects. You only have to create concrete pieces that belongs to architecture, not individual pieces of design, for example. So this was very important because in this time, at that time, Paulo stopped to design objects, and he started to do this brutalist architecture where the objects was incorporated in the architecture, like here, for example. And like here also in this concrete table. This is Mazetti House and this is Butantan House. Similar designs with the same window and the same idea of incorporating the objects in the architecture by the concrete. But of course, this is a late house he designed in the late 80s, concrete with the prefabricated structure by concrete, Geographies house. And when we see the books organized or edited by Paulo, if we talk about houses, we only see this house, not the others, because he didn't, at this moment, he didn't like to show his houses, because for him, houses was a bourgeois work that doesn't, that was not interesting anymore to live in a city like São Paulo, for example. Many times we could hear he saying, you have to live in a building, in a tall building close to the subway. There's no space for houses in the vertical city. But Geographies, it was allowed to be here because it was a prefabricated design. So it was in industry in this sense. So it fits very well with his discourse. But by the other side, going back to the ludic side of the Homo ludens, Paulo many times said, architecture doesn't want to be functional, but opportune. It must express the desire, an erotic view of life. Well, this is a strong statement, right? And I don't have in my presentation the image of the pool in the rooftop of Sesc 24 de Maio, as I saw in Vanessa presentation and Jean-Louis mentioned, but it would be perfect here in this idea of creating this desire, an erotic view of life, because it was a big effort to put a pool in the rooftop of that building, an existing building. But it was the main goal of that project, that building, to bring the Carioca beach to the very center of São Paulo, to the rough downtown of São Paulo, with this sense of sensuality. And if we think about joy, another example is this hot water plumbing system in his house used to warm the towers, for example, because Paulo says many times, I didn't design this house for me. It's a shame, I'm an adult. I have to create it for the kids, for my children, because they have to have fun in this house. So this is the adaptation of the technique to this ludic way of seeing and living the spaces. And in many examples, we see these sketches. Here is a scenography for a play, but this is like a crazy invention, like a Leonardo da Vinci, a contemporary Leonardo da Vinci creating crazy machines, right? But using exactly this knowledge of the hand, so to folding pieces of metal, like designing these pieces for the handrail for the Museum of Sculpture. I have to finish my presentation. I am finishing, but just to conclude, here we see the plan of the Butantan house with big spans and big cantilevers, but this nucleus of bedrooms, the walls doesn't reach the ceiling. So that's why, after I will read this phrase, that's why we see in this house, but not only in this house, in many Mendes da Rocha houses of this period, a situation where in the house you are sharing all the space in terms of smells and sounds. So it's a true collective space. That's why Flávio Mota, in a very important article, defined this house as a rationalized favela. He says, it's a space created as a social project whose simplicity assumes a relationship of living in a kind of rationalized favela, in which each one accepts coexistence with the others without solid walls, but within new and desired conditions of human respect. It is a proposal that demands a response, because it is creative work with its implicit social responsibility. Of course, it's not so easy to see this concrete house as a rationalized favela, but it's easy when we think in this way, like the spaces of a house in favela as a collective space where sometimes there are no walls but curtains and no separation between rooms. So this is the connection he really wanted to create in his own house and many others. Like Hélio Oiticica, a great Brazilian artist of the same period, who came from the constructivist heritage to this perception of the space of the houses in the favela, like something that opens a possibility of freedom, a new freedom for using spaces. Hélio Oiticica changed a lot his work after climbing the mountains on the hills in Rio of Mangueira and knowing much better the favelas. So to end, this is the drawing for a Krasberg Museum in Vitória. It was not built, but this project, Paulo proposed to incorporate these big structures of the harbor as the structure of the building. So it's a kind of objet trouvé or ready-made. So it's at the same time some invention of his mind, but also a great complement to recycling, sustainability, and to the machines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guilherme, for this great intervention. Shall I open the floor? Questions, remarks?
I guess
Maybe I don't. Can you hear the? Can you hear? Well, yeah.
I'll speak loudly.
Yes.
But it's interesting to listen to both of your lectures talk about Paul's work as it relates to structure. He mentioned how he kind of incorporates the unexpected. And I think in this last lecture, there's lots of examples of him. Sorry, I'm trying to formulate the question. Just going first, but it's an interesting balance in his work of knowing the material and knowing how things are, but then also being inventive and designing something that's unexpected. So I guess in researching his work, how do you think he developed that ability? How did he balance knowing the material, knowing how things are, how the structure will work, knowing how it's constructed, but also finding new ways?
Thank you. Sorry, I could not hear very well. Maybe Vanessa, can you make it again to me to understand with the microphone?
Kelly's coming closer to the camera. Yes.
We'll see if I can reiterate it in a more concise fashion. But I think in Paulo's work, there's this interesting balance of him knowing the material, knowing how things are constructed, but then also pushing the boundaries of that material and designing something that's unexpected. So I guess in looking at his work, how do you think he developed that method, or how did he get to that point of balancing the two?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's it. Exactly that. You defined it very well. By one side, it was the heritage of modernism in Brazil and the faith in São Paulo in technique, because Vila Nova Artigas, for example, who was the master of Paulo Mendes da Rocha in the sense, came from engineering, because the Faculty of Architecture in the University of São Paulo came from Polytechnic engineering. So there is a big tradition of a faith in technique as the tool for transformation. But Paulo has something very different in his mind, because for example, the big beam of MUBI, the Museum of Sculpture, we could see previous here, as the stone in the sky, the stone floating in the sky, is a kind of surrealistic imagination, right? Inspired by Magritte, a painting by Magritte, that is a rock floating in the sky. And Paulo said that it was inspired in this painting. So I can never imagine Vila Nova Artigas designing something like the Museum of Sculpture, because there's no function for this big piece of pre-stressed concrete, right? And this absence of function is something created by Paulo. So we don't see it in no other architect in São Paulo of the same period. The same we can say about Osaka. So to creating a topography, a fake topography, right? Is today we can say it is a kind of postmodernism. It is. I don't know if we see the design by Rem Koolhaas to the hotel in Agadir, Morocco, is the same thing. This topography of hills. So if we look at the Yokohama terminal by FOA in Japan, is a creation of artificial topography. In this sense, Paulo was doing this in '69. So it's really another sense of freedom and incorporating this possibility of the ludic side of architecture as something very important. Of course, we can say Niemeyer at the same time used the curves. Yes, the curves, the free form of the structure for concrete in Niemeyer is very important, but not in this sense. The curves in Niemeyer's work is more used in the sense of creating sensual spaces with the structure of concrete, but not a statement of this conceptual art like the MUBI beam, for example, is very different.
Yes, Guilherme, many thanks. It's an illuminating presentation, and your essay is even more developed. So I wanted to ask you something which you mentioned briefly in your essay on the side of the bricklayer. Bricklayer is someone who has no preconceived project, but conceives the project out of available parts, what he finds, what he collects. So you're mentioning, I think it would be interesting for the audience here if you could comment on 2 points you make in your essay. One is the relationship of the windows with the automobiles at a moment when Brazil is developing its own car industry, especially in São Paulo. One, and the second is the curious origin of the towel dryers in the bathroom, which is a good example of transfer from the object as found to the design, because it will, after Butantan, be present in all these interiors. So can you comment on this for our audience here?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much for the opportunity and remembering these aspects of the essay. Yes, first of all, defining the bricoleur, you used a word very important, that is the bricoleur is a collector of objects. And when we look at the Paulo's office, it was exactly like that, a collection of many objects. He was collecting everywhere and making all of these objects also at the same time. And so the 2 topics you mentioned, the first of all, yes, so there's this window for his own house and for Mazzetti house is a very complex design object, right? Complex and simple at the same time. And this is the paradox, and very beautiful in this sense. But because there are many words for the detail in design that I don't know how to say in English, but so it's difficult to describe this project of this window. But it's a system of shifting the glass, because you have to open it, and the position of equilibrium is outside when it's open, but with the steel structure of frame and pieces of rubber to support the glass. And he imagined also to have the possibility of the glass to do this movement, opening and going up and down. Yes, and he incorporated the solution of these windows of buses and cars, of Volkswagen cars in Brazil and in São Paulo at that time. So it's a kind of ready-made architecture in this sense, because it's a perception that if we don't have the same industry as Germany in the Bauhaus, as the same industry as the United States, of course we don't have it. So we have to create something different. So he was every time adapting solutions he could see everywhere in the city, because the city was the school for learning how to build. And with this man, it was developing new designs in the industry, but also in the favela. So he incorporated this same system of doing this movement with the glass and for his sophisticated design. And the system of heating the towels in his house, it was, he said that he saw it for the first time in Moscow, in Russia, because of course in the rough winter of Russia, in a hotel, he saw these tubes not inside the wall but outside, and being used to carry out the towers, and so using something that was every time hidden inside the houses in regular architecture as something more brutalist, in the sense that you can expose and use as a joy as reinforcing the discourse of fantasy as something that the kids could like it and imagine something coming after that. That's it.
German cars and Russian tubes under the tropics.
Exactly.
We have a question from Christy. Maybe you want to come close. Yeah, you want to speak first.
Hi. Hi, I'm Christy, also coming from Mackenzie, São Paulo. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts of Paulo Mendes da Rocha have been through the time where several regulations changing and being more strict in terms of construction in São Paulo. So in this Homo faber, would you see that influencing his creativity, his Homo ludens? And how would that translate?
Translate to what?
Can I ask in Portuguese as well? So over time, Paulo was through this time where the requirements, construction requirements became more strict over time, right? And he has this very specific creative way of dealing with the site. For instance, the Butantan house with the concrete was extremely thin, and then after a while he would not allow it to construct with that anymore. Or perhaps the structure of the windows would have to be something further thin and not that something on site. So with that in mind, do you see that his late work, for instance, Sesc 24 de Maio, would that requirements influence his way of thinking, his poesy on constructing, and how that happened?
Okay. Yeah, a very important example in this sense for me is the project for the Zezinho Magalhães complex housing in the late 60s. Paulo did it with Vila Nova Artigas and Fábio Penteado, because at that moment it was they were trying to really develop the prefabrication of concrete in São Paulo and Brazil. So it was a possibility to do even if it was for the dictatorship, but the possibility to build a huge housing complex with prefabricated concrete. So developing the language of architecture for it and developing the industry at the same time. And we know that it was not built as prefabricated concrete. It was built on site, so in a more artisanal way. And it was a great failure for them in this sense. I think after that, Paulo realized that maybe the way of doing architecture in Brazil was not trying to fight against the impossibility of doing that. So if Artigas remains trying to do an architecture connected to this discourse of industrialization, Paulo, in the 80s, we can see from the 80s, exactly in the moment when Artigas died, it's when we think about 84, 85, it's a special moment because Artigas died and the dictatorship ends in Brazil. So it's a new moment. So I think it's a moment when Paulo realized, so Artigas is not here anymore, so I am the guy. I have to do the things. And now we are in democracy. So we have new possibilities. So the old way of thinking about concrete architecture as a way to develop the country and etc., it was abandoned by him. and he started to work with metal structures, for example, and he incorporates more this discourse of the Homo ludens. So trying to imagine new possibilities for architecture in this new country of democracy. And it's interesting because this is the Paulo who influenced the new generation is in that moment, because we are lucky, because in the 90s, it's exactly the moment when Paulo became to be recognized outside of Brazil. And someone very important for the new generations in São Paulo. That's why, of course, we can see in some projects of this new generation some architecture that we can sometimes think about a mannerism of brutalism. So the same language of the 60s, but we see more this true comprehension of architecture as or like something that you have to create for the freedom of life, not to be inside this jail of concrete structures and doing every time the same thing. That's why Paulo is so important for us, for the new generation. Maybe Ciro and Kate can talk more about this.
Thanks, Christy. Maybe we have, because we're like it's already 3:30, so we should stop for 10 minutes, and then we get back, and then we can keep the questions for later on, because I have questions, but I'll keep it for later. So I'm more than happy to welcome and introduce Ciro Miguel, a Brazilian architect, photographer, and doctoral fellow of the Institute for History and Theory of Architecture at ETH Zurich. Ciro holds a professional diploma from the University of São Paulo and a master's degree from Columbia University. At ETH Zurich, Ciro taught architectural design together with Angelo Bucci and Mark Angelo. As a practitioner, he was a partner of SPBR Arquitetos for many years and still collaborates with the office. As a design architect, Ciro worked at Bernard Tschumi Architects New York. His work has been exhibited at biennials in Venice, São Paulo, and in museums such as the Pinakothek der Moderne in Munich, the Swiss Architecture Museum in Basel, the Center for Architecture in New York, and the New Institute in Rotterdam. Ciro was co-curator of Todo Dia Every Day, the 12th International Architecture Biennale of São Paulo, of which I was also curator together with Charlotte Martier-Bach. And in 2022, he co-edited the book Everyday Matters, Contemporary Approaches to Architecture, which we did together, published by Ruby Press. So Ciro is a dear friend and a long-term collaborator, so I'm very happy to have him here. Thanks, Ciro.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes? Hold on a second. Can you hear me, Vanessa? Is it fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes? Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for the invitation again to Vanessa Grossman, Jean-Louis Cohen, the Berlage. It's an honor to be here in this event, sharing this moment with all of you and with so many people that I admire. So my presentation is called Designing Through Sections. And this research started actually when I was a student at FAUSP a long time ago. And once during a studio session, and probably because I was stuck in my own design, I heard for the first time from a dear professor called Antonio Carlos Barossi that a project should, and I quote, always start with the section. To design meant to always think in section, and ideally one section would be able to explain the whole project, which at school led me to spend a lot of time drawing and researching sections. So the mantra to always start with the section continued throughout my years at FAUSP. The building itself, designed by Villanova Artigas and where Paulo taught for many years, was also conceptualized in section, as one could see in here in one of Artigas' early sketches. Artigas' statement to construct a school that would be the specialization of democracy was translated to a section in which the first assumption was a building with no doors. Commenting on this, the Brazilian architect Angelo Bucci, who was also a student of Paulo Mendes da Rocha, wrote, "This doorlessness in section marks a key departure from the repertoire we have inherited from the European tradition." So Angelo was already pointing out to this as an invention that appeared in section. Then you have on the side this omnipresent image that you probably all of you have seen, which constantly reinforces the idea present in section, that the spatial generosity of an open plaza with no hierarchy between inside and outside, school and city, academic community and society. So after years working in São Paulo as an architect, always starting projects with a section, I came to teach design studios at ETH in 2013. It was there that this mode of thinking in section became clearer. At ETH in Zurich, students used section as something after the fact. Plans, collages, renderings, and models came first. Sections were understood as a liner drawing, generated automatically from a 3D model and printed quite small presentation boards and sometimes not even talked about. So it was in this context that I started to collect examples and try to understand why architecture was designed through sections and somehow to explain that to the students. From this research, I realized that from 1950s onward, iconic architectures both built in Brazil all shared a singular affinity for the section. In the Brazilian context, the section was not only a notational technique, but it was also how architects synthesize an idea and intention. This siren here is from the building next to my, here in Paulista Avenue, so it's okay. The section encompassed everything: tectonic performance, resources, space generosity, relationship with the built environment, relationship to topography, to climate, ideas on collectivity and inclusiveness. The emphasis on that specific representation was so strong that all others, such as plans, renderings, and collages, appear secondary, leading to the presumption that in Brazil, architects really think through the section. The early development of this strategy traces back to a few modern architectural experiments in the late 30s in Rio de Janeiro. It later gained momentum with the works of the so-called Paulista School in São Paulo, with Lina Bobardi, Villanova Artigas, and of course, Paulo Mendes da Rocha, and continued to evolve over the years. It was in Rio de Janeiro where a young generation was reinventing and expanding some of the spatial experiments of modern architecture. This is the architecture known from its transparency, fluidity, the design mingling with nature, and it was celebrated internationally with the Brazilian Pavilion in the New York's World Fair in '39 and the moment Brazil built in '43, which is this one. So I'm going to talk about this building here that was shown in this exhibition first. So this is actually a page from the catalog of this exhibition Brazil Builds. And this Ministry of Education and Health was a building commissioned by the new government in '36 and was part of a nation building policy in which modern architecture would be its new face. In this context, the architect Costa, leading a group of very talented Brazilian architects, invited Le Corbusier to Rio de Janeiro to collaborate with the team. In Rio, Le Corbusier left a sketch here in the upper part that was designed for a large site a bit far from downtown and closer to the coast. When he went back to Europe, the site changed places and the Brazilian team led by Lúcio Costa redesigned the whole building, so changed the proportions to adapting to its new place. So the most crucial change was actually a new section that was suggested by a very young architect at the time, Oscar Niemeyer, stretching the pilotis from the original height of 4 meters to 10 meters. The simple, decisive, and profound move inaugurated a new moment of architecture in Brazil. So you see here how it was in the original design by Corbusier, and here the stretch made by Oscar Niemeyer. So in a way, this subversion of Corbusier's pilotis rewrote Corbusier's seminal quote from towards a new architecture. The section is now the generator, not the plan. So here, the plan is a generation, this section is what determines everything. It is the decisive moment. So this is the result. It reinvents the building, how the building interacts with the city, proposing a common ground and a concept of the pilotis as a place. This not so subtle change does not divide the plaza, and predicted how precious this area would become in the extreme density of downtown Rio de Janeiro a few decades later. And here on the side, a photo by a photojournalist René Bourri, who was in Brazil in the 60s, and reveals how unprogrammed space was then appropriated by daily life. And the pilotis was not only a passage, but now it created urbanity. It reminds us of the famous words of Paulo Mendes da Rocha that the role of architecture is to support the unpredictability of life. So then finally we go south to São Paulo, a metropolis of 25.6 million people and a very different landscape than Rio de Janeiro. As you can see, there are no mountains, no beach. In this very impressive photograph of downtown São Paulo by Nelson Pong, one can understand the artificial floor of the city and how it became a constructed geography in a way. It is a typical condition of the urbanization of São Paulo, where was once a valley and a river that you can see here in the middle. Nature was tamed and constructed, forming a juxtaposition of infrastructures, highways, bridges, tunnels, and so in his case, it is the dissolution of buildings. Angelo Bucci, the architect Angelo Bucci, proposes an ideal cross-section through central São Paulo, exactly through this place that I was showing in the picture. In his drawing, he identifies an existing 20-meter thick layer of constructed ground, architectural situations in the city that exist in the city, like latent, and he summarized that in 4 operations for possible projects in the future. To look out, to cross, to invade, and to infiltrate. So here he uses this section as an instrument to analyze the built environment and to propose kind of new possibilities for architecture in this place. So it is in this thick floor that Angelo Bucci described in the heart of São Paulo downtown that this project, by this renovation of a former bus terminal that was proposed by Paulo Mendes da Rocha in 92. It is a simple section of a steel structure hovering at the entrance, or somehow infiltration as one of the operations that I described, through an existing gallery inside the bridge, connecting different levels of the city. So you hear the roof, and here is the entrance that goes into the bridge, somehow this gallery into the bridge. So this is the situation. You see the context in the city. So you see the bridge here and how this became a new portal for those crossing the bridge, somehow from the new center to the old center, and from those coming from below, from the river level to the flat land here. And somehow this is an image that I put as a curiosity. This is the week that this building was inaugurated in São Paulo, and somehow brings to this quote of Paulo Mendes da Rocha that he says, the people inaugurate the place with their action. And somehow, as soon as it was there, it was already part of the city almost immediately. And what is interesting is that one of the people inaugurating the place is Vanessa Grossman here on the right side, still as a student at FAUSP at the time. We had just coming back from a Oscar Niemeyer lecture, so I somehow found this image. Yeah. So in this larger section done by ETH students, you can see how the intervention dialogues with the metropolitan scale of São Paulo. So you see here the gallery, the bridge, the tunnels, the river, and the subway here. And how it connects also, how it's important to connect these very distinct worlds historically, actually, the flatlands and the lowlands, which we'll always consider less somehow. So this also a political act to create this project. This is an image of this is a model of the buildings that they did of the roof with concrete and paper. It's an SOM building on the back, actually. And this is a model that they did, kind of reimagining the section in a plaster model. So somehow here you see the gallery, here the infrastructure, the bridge, and here they even like duplicate the roof as the entrance to this building that is integrated to the ground of São Paulo. And this is the roof how it was now in 2002 during a political rally for Lula during the election campaign. This is what were filming for the exhibition. So the next project, as you guys, it was already presented, I will just show it briefly. It's the Brazilian pavilion in Osaka, designed in the 1970s, and one of Paulo Mendes da Rocha most iconic works. It is a statement in section which reduces the proposal to the minimum, just a line above the horizon. Even columns disappear in this drawing. So in this project, architecture is understood not as a sealed and opaque form, but as an artifact that can dialogue with the landscape represented by the extension of this ground floor, which is also constructed, as you can see here, by the programs in it. So here one could understand that Paulo Mendes da Rocha dismantles actually Artigas buildings from all its elements, I mean, FAO that I showed in the beginning, just keeping the roof as this almost technological artifact hovering above the landscape. Just here you see both of them together, and here the section of the roof, how it works. This roof will be repeated many times in the projects we'll see later. And according to critic Sofia Teles, she says, the section is reasoned by inversion. The stability of the ground is transferred to the self-supporting form of the object, while the surface where the construction is located seems to keep in motion, something unstable. So somehow there's an inversion. The floor is that moves, and the architecture, this artifact remains the same. And then she says, according to her, Osaka inverts Oscar Niemeyer's thinking that the curve over the straight line, which is referring to something more or less like this. So somehow this project changes the way that the section is thought. Annette Spiro, in the same vein, she comments, when the building incorporates this horizon line, there's a decisive shift. She says, the pavilion invents, in contrast to the free plan, the free section. So the ground floor becomes unique and fluid, and what is erratic is not the terrain, but the floating beam of the roof. And after the pavilion was demolished, more than the images that are very rare, the free sections, the ones that I just showed, remain a powerful image of this general common ground and very present in the Brazilian architecture's collective memory. And somehow it was interesting to see it appear again in the competition for the Brazilian pavilion in Osaka again. This is the entry by AR Arquitetos and Marcelo Rosenbaum. So just a little interlude, since the next project by Rocha is Avenida Paulista. So Paulista is the geographical, cultural, and political landmark of São Paulo, is the busiest avenues in the city. It's in the city's highest point, and it's the stage for conflict celebrations, and somehow after 2005, I guess it was closed to cars traffic on Sunday. So this is an image that you see there on Sunday, closed on Sundays. And it's interesting to see how the buildings flanking this very busy avenue adopt different strategies in section that amplify, or sometimes not, the building's porosity to everyday life. So you see buildings that really accept this kind of energy of the avenue, and buildings that really shut it down as kind of a solid. So this is what you see here is actually Lina Bobardi's building, the Museum of Modern Art. And in a very simple move, somehow she splits the program of the museum in section and keeps the view free. I mean, this idea of looking out to the valley, and somehow expands the city, creating a public plaza under the building. So this is the picture of building with this is on Sunday. This is when they have this antiquities fair, and not far from there. So you see here MASP here. This is Fiesp, which is a project by original from Rino Levi from 79, and where in 96 Paulo Mendes da Rocha and his team MMBB was invited to renovate the ground floor to create a cultural center. So this is the building here. You see the enormous, how enormous, it's a mammoth almost in the avenue, and the original drawings of in Levy, and you see here how the was very simple, just going up a stair, and then you had kind of a pilotis here. And Paulo Mendes da Rocha and his teams were then invited to rethink this new cultural center. And this image is interesting because the blackboard explains a bit the modus operandi of Paulo Mendes da Rocha, a hand-drawn section that he was doing all the time to discuss the project with his team. So improvising and updating the drawing at each step of the project. So as the project would change, this drawing in this blackboard would also change. So somehow the section was also used as a communication tool with him and the team. So Marta Moreira, that was from MBB Architects and was part of the team for Fiesc, she describes this drawing. She says, when Mendes da Rocha makes that sketch of a section on the blackboard, everything is already there. The voids, the volume of the art gallery, the idea is already quite evolved in an essence. And then obviously it gets refined. We enter into conversations with the structure, with installations, with development of thinking of how details would be. So somehow this section here, everything contains everything. And this building and this section somehow, he creates this, he actually cuts part of the existing slab here and here, so creates a sort of veranda for the avenue, also expanding the avenue inside the building, then creates a foyer for the theater. He splits it in two, so one floor you go to the gallery, one you go to the library. Then there was a mezzanine that also connects the avenue to the Boulevard gardens that are here on top of the theater. So this is an image from the Paulista. So you see kind of this box, almost like a parasite under this huge mass in concrete. This was made in steel. This is the split of the ground floor of Paulista. So going up and down here, you also access the buildings. Here's this mezzanine that I was mentioning. So this is connecting to the gardens of Boulevard, the building here of Hino Levi. So this picture is actually three architects together. So it's Hino Levi, Boulevard, and Paulo Mendes da Rocha. And this is the gardens of Boulevard on top of the theater. So the other building was designed almost at the same time as Fiesc, also as a team. Not Paulo Mendes da Rocha alone. It was kind of his new way of working that started in the 90s. And this was initially the School of Arts and Crafts, designed by Homo in 1900 actually, and the building was never finished. It was always an unfinished construction. And in the 90s, in 93, Paulo Mendes da Rocha was invited to reimagine the place as the new Pinacoteca do Estado. I mean, it was already there, but to renovate the building as a whole to become this new museum and conceive what it could be, this new museum. So, and then in this context, he associated with a former collaborator, Eduardo Colonelli. So this building is one that I always thought it was actually designed and planned somehow, but it was not. For Paulo Mendes da Rocha, when he was looking at the plan initially, he thought that the building's original architecture was foolish and elitist, trying too hard to imitate neoclassical forms and special arrangements from Europe. So he was calling it a simulacrum of Palladio. So somehow from then on, he creates three spatial subversions that disobey this Palladian discipline of Ramos Azevedo. So the first operation that actually happens in plan, he rotates the entrance of the building from here to the side. So this is kind of updating the location. I mean, this is much more convenient here. It was closer to the subway. There was kind of a more space for entrances. So then as soon as he rotates the building, the whole project becomes a section. And from then on, everything is decided on this section. And actually from the conversations with Eduardo Colonelli, they actually designed a model in section to decide what they would do. So the project is very simple. So the first move is that they cover the existing patios here with this roof that is also very similar to the one of Auguspi that I showed before at the Osaka, this time made in steel. Then they create these passerelles that these bridges that somehow
cross the gap of these existing voids. And Paulo Mendes da Rocha, when he was during the construction site, he followed very closely the construction site. He said of this transgression of crossing this space. So he says, when I entered the building, I found 3 voids, a patio, an octagon, and another space. So I thought about making a bridge. When I was inside making the first visit, some birds flew by and crossed the 3 spaces. So I thought, I like these birds, I want to address. I'm going to do an actual visit to enjoy, not to feel a predetermined script. So here's Paulo Mendes da Rocha during the construction. Here seeing the void with Eduardo Tornelli. Another picture of him remind me of like the image that Jean-Louis Cohen showed him in the construction. And this is the moment of this transgression, actually, when the first bridge is installed in this gap, in this void. Here are other pictures of the construction site that was not as clean as we imagine, even though it was made of steel. So you see here some chaotic moments. And this is the final result. So you see here the roof again, and the bridges crossing the space. So the last project that I will show is the SESC 24 de Maio that Vanessa already mentioned, already showed this image. So was finished in 2017, located, as you can see, in the heart of São Paulo, actually one of the busiest corners of the city, also very close to the subway. And it was a renovation as well of an existing building that was a department store to hold this SESC facilities program. So in this conceptual section that was done by Paulo Mendes da Rocha and MBB again, the whole program is just opposed in section. So the project multiplies the diversity of this downtown São Paulo vertically, stacking all the sequence of programs in 13 floors. So you see here a square that puts public space connecting to this ground floor of the city, restaurants, library, dental clinic, sports, dancing, and then the swimming pool on the top that Guilherme Wisnik mentioned. So here is a more architectural section of it. So you see an existing patio here in section that they put 4 columns to hold the swimming pool on top. It's almost like a building inside another building. And then they use the opportunity of this, somehow occupying this patio to also have different heights, different from the existing building. So you could put sports halls, and also the dancing in this middle. So this is just a few pictures to go through the building. So this is this kind of plaza underneath. You see here one of the columns of the swimming pool. The ramps, that is also kind of an artifact installed in the building, this wall of glass. And somehow the ramp also became part of the city. Here is a line for lunch that happens every day. So somehow the city enters the building and occupies all these spaces. This is a public veranda in the middle of it, in the 3rd floor, where people come also to sleep or to just charge the phone, to work. It's a very bland space, but somehow very vivid. Another picture of it. So some of the scenes that you see it. This is in the middle of the building. This is the new height. So you see the columns here. This is under the swimming pool. This is a protection from the handrail that, as soon as the building opened, became a kids' pool. And somehow it is like that at the moment. It became this. So also this ludic side of the project that was accepted. Here you see also a couple kissing in one of the sides of the building with the feet in the water as if they were on the beach. And then the last image, which is this erotic side of Mendes da Rocha that he envisioned for São Paulo in the middle of the city to create this urban beach. So another picture of it. was in a Saturday, and this place became also this inspiration for our Biennale that Vanessa already mentioned, that we co-curated together, and somehow it was a dialogue with this building and with Paulo Mendes da Rocha. And for our interventions, we also decided of it in sections, so we kind of distributed everyday spaces of the building to different architects to kind of interact with this almost machine building. And this is an image of just one that was made by Blute in the rooftop in this swimming pool. They made this cloud with water for the people going to the. And so this is my last image. So this is an ideal cross-section section of São Paulo downtown, depicting how these buildings construct the city's common ground. Seeing them drawn together here in this drawing made by students at the time at Bendrisio in Switzerland, one realizes that by joining technique and political intentions in section, architects and engineers developed a new concept for urban life, supported by a vocabulary of long spans, cantilevers, plazas, gardens, ramps, and large roofs. These projects still defy the fragmented nature of São Paulo and its social hierarchies. Instead of fences, walls, and barriers, they provide open, continuous, and unprogrammed public spaces, attracting people every day and mitigating the lack of leisure, culture, and sports facilities. If, as Paulo Mendes da Rocha used to say, that every project is a political statement, to always start with a section is a compelling approach to oppose spatial, social, and environmental vulnerabilities and celebrate collectivity, a city for all. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Ciro. I failed to mention that we commissioned Ciro Miguel and Felipe de Ferrari, who is the principal of Plan Comum, to produce the films, 11 films that will be really have a major presence at the exhibition, because we thought that this everyday life taking shape inside this, this building designed by Paulo Mendes da Rocha, not only in São Paulo, but also in his hometown of Vitória, in Angra dos Reis, the Geographies house I already mentioned to you. We thought that would be something crucial for the grand public, let's say, to have a taste of the colors, of the sounds and the atmosphere and everyday life. So thank you, Ciro. And we move to our final speaker. It is.
Maybe some questions.
Oh yeah, because we thought that we were grouping the two questions. Okay. Do you want? Maybe we can open the questions to Ciro. Yeah, why not? Yes, Anna.
Should I move it?
Yeah. So we have some questions, Ciro, already.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. So I think that the use of sections as primary design tool for Brazilian architects is totally related to the spatial understanding that comes from the geographical condition of the country. So you read the mountains and the rivers through the section and not a plan. And yeah, I would like to know if there are any other cultural aspects that you see are linked to this way of thinking, actually, of thinking life as well.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part. It cut a bit of the question.
Okay. So if you see or think there are other cultural aspects that are related to this way of seeing life through section, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the section, I mean, it relates to many things. Of course, the geography, as you mentioned, also the climate, which in the case of FAO, for instance, that you can make a building that inside and outside is the same. I mean, it's the same air, let's say. I also think that the architecture done in a context of São Paulo, for instance, in a very complex city, as you could see, I mean, where that roof is made, I mean, it's a
really a knot of many, many things. And so the section actually is it's the drawing that somehow can encompass all these things and somehow decide also on the structure to decide of how the ground floor would enter the building and how it would dialogue with the existing. So somehow the buildings are they're less thought as an isolated thing. So this line, the drawing the ground floor, it's always very important to draw. So as when we were working at school as an architect here, it's there's always this kind of ground floor line. It's this horizontal line, and then everything is decided from that. Yeah.
So, Ciro, if you go back to the section that you showed at the end, the general section of Mendrisio, can you put it that image back?
Yeah, sure.
Something that Anna spoke in the beginning of her question, you know, that we have been discussing a lot. I think there is also, perhaps unique to Paulo Mendes da Rocha, a certain archaeology that is embedded in the section, and also perhaps also the legacy of Paulo in relation to younger generations like Angelo Bucci. I mean, when he talks about Mubi, he always says, well, this is a nerve that has been there since pre-Columbian times and has not been touched. And whereas in other parts of the city, I mean, if you see here, these are catalyzed rivers, right? And I've been speaking of rivers and the way, you know, for him, I mean, the idea that the country could be, you know, this kind of arrival at this coast and how you can make your way inland, that was the kind of situation with which the Portuguese found themselves in this coast, and how can you get into the land and kind of formalize all those desires of, you know, having an idea of the planet and how you can actually, you know, make sense of it. And of course, for all sorts of reasons that we know, like resource extraction and slavery that came with it. But for Paulo, these rivers are really like, so there is a kind of, they were canalized, they were brutalized in São Paulo. You have no sense of topography. And I think that is something so strong in his idea of section, you know, kind of this archaeology of the city that could have been, and the way these rivers actually dried up, and the valleys actually, you know, are fully built. And you have, I mean, we were discussing it with Elliot, who said that he's been to São Paulo, and when he was studying Goimbé and looking at the section going from Avenida Paulista to Pinheiros River, he didn't realize it was so steep. I mean, he couldn't grasp the topography, and something very unique to São Paulo. So I think there is an archaeological kind of endeavor in what you mentioned. I mean, the rivers and the mountains, and that you can only see that through sections. I mean, the plan doesn't really give you, even though you can draw the lines of the earth. I think that this is something that could be said about also, you know, all this drawings that you showed of São Paulo, which even in Lina Bobardi's case is, you know, I mean, Ciro Miguel has many collages, designed many photo montages, and one of them is the mast sitting on a kind of a waterfall, you know, because that used to be a river passing underneath a mast. And so that was a river that was completely destroyed, and it became like this kind of, there's this Gotham City quality, but it used to be a completely different, you know, experience in the city. And of course, this is embedded in a kind of envy of Rio, because in a way, geography won and is so prevalent in the city, and in a way, it saved a little bit of its public spaces. So I think this is very strong in Paulo's embeddedness in this geographical fate of São Paulo. Do you have? Yes.
Hi, thanks for this lecture. I actually have a question about section, and also is the relationship between section and also another perspective like plan, like elevation, and also the 3D, because if you really think about the plan, it's actually another perspective of a section when we draw the plan. So I want to see, okay, the section is important. What about the next? What about the next step? and how to cooperate with the different dimensions of the building. Because from my perspective, the experience is always difficult to coordinate between section, plan, and also the overview of the building, and always reach to, okay, I fix the problem of the section, and afterwards there's problem coming in the plan, and I need to go back to plan, and when I fix the problem, and there's problem with the section, and switch. So, I mean, what's the next step?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I think it's striking, what I try to show is that conceptually the building is thought in section. I mean, the whole project is decided in section. And then from then on, of course, that there are many decisions that are made in plan, inevitably, of course. But the section is a very important tool to kind of gather all these very complex things that the project somehow condensates. So you can put everything in this section. And in the case of Paulo Mendes da Rocha, he had this very beautiful way of working that he was, as I showed in the Fiesp case, that he was drawing a section to talk with the team and to decide and to kind of change almost real time how the project would look like. And as soon as that thing is done, the project is set to go. I mean, every decision is decided somehow. So the plans, of course, there are changes that in plan would also affect the section and vice versa. It's not a one-way, it's not just one-way strategy, but it's an entry point to decide, to discuss difficult questions. I guess. I don't know if Wisnik and Catherine have other ideas on that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I was wondering, you keep talking about sort of the expansive stuff, or expansive spaces. So I'm curious as to how he juxtaposes that with compression, because that only really works as a mechanism if you first confine and then release, and how he deals with the sort of the architectural promenade, if you will, you know, the flow through the space so that you get these expanses and then their impact is really strong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think you're totally correct. I think that there are a lot of projects that actually this compression happens. I mean, in the case of Fiesp, you have this, it's different than Lina Bobardi's, no? That is just elevates the block and everything is an open plaza somehow. Fiesp is a much more delicate situation in which you go down, so you have a more protected space, and go up, also more protected spaces with even different heights. So it's much, I think it's more sophisticated. Also, the one at Mubi also happens this thing that you are actually in an open plaza and suddenly you are on the ground, even without noticing, where, you know, it's kind of a very fluid shift from the open to the protected. So then you're under, suddenly you are inside the museum. So you don't even know if it's underground or overground. So I think that in section, there's a very beautiful, I think Guilherme showed this, I think Guy Nordenson showed first this section of Mubi, that you have these two lines, like somehow it's kind of connecting these different levels of the city, and this thing forms the...
Yes.
Guilherme,
yeah, exactly.
section. He's inhabiting the section.
We did. It was not. We didn't know each that way.
Yeah. Are there more questions? Maybe we can just keep, if we still have questions for a final Q&A session. So it is really an honor to welcome and introduce Catherine Otondo, who is an architect who graduated from the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism of the University of São Paulo in 1994, In 2013, she received her doctoral degree from the same institution with the presentation of her dissertation, Design and Built Space, Relations Between Thinking and Doing, in the work of Paulo Mendes da Rocha. She has also published the books Maquetes de Papel, Paper Models, which we've seen last Wednesday, Itinerários de Arquitetura, Paulo Mendes da Rocha, and the short film, 29 Minutes with Paulo Mendes da Rocha. She's currently a partner at the Base Urbana practice in partnership with the architect Marina Grinover. The office develops projects in various scales of architecture and urban design, focusing on the complete projection process from the first drawings to the execution of the work. Caterina Otondo was a professor of architecture at the Institute of Architecture and Urbanism at the University of São Paulo and currently teaches the same subject at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism at Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie. So we heard about Mackenzie, where Paulo Mendes da Rocha studied. In 2020, Caterina Otondo was elected together with a group of 156 women, president of the Council of Architecture and Urbanism of the state of São Paulo, for the management of the 2021-23 triennium. Other than being an architect, well, this is me now speaking of Cate, other than being an architect, a scholar, and a curator who has been dedicated to the evaluation and dissemination of Paulo Mendes da Rocha's work, Caterina Otondo was a student, a friend of the architect, almost like a family member. Well, Guilherme said she was a neighbor, but she was much more than a neighbor, who knew Paulo Mendes da Rocha for a very long time. She is responsible for the full organization of his archives. So this is how you can use a dissertation to organize the archive of a lifetime practice. And she prepared their transfer to Casa da Arquitectura, and she runs the scientific committee of constructed geographies, or exhibition. She is responsible for curating the exhibition's parallel program, together with the director of Casa da Arquitectura, Nuno Sampaio. And without her work, this project would have never been possible. So thank you so much, Kate, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. Well, a little bit exaggerated the last phrase, but thank you very much from my heart. Hello, everybody. Are you hearing me? Well, my internet is very bad today here. Lots of helicopters.
Yes, we hear you, yes.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank Berlage. It's the first time I'm meeting your students, and I heard you guys are great. I saw the models and that Vanessa brought to Casa da Arquitectura, and they are wonderful. I'm looking forward to see the other ones. Congratulations. And hello, Guy and Jean-Louis and Vanessa. Thank you very much for having me and my friends here from São Paulo, Guilherme and Ciro. I'm going to do perhaps an uncommon presentation. I'm going to enter this discussion throughout a more domestic way. And as Vanessa pointed, I had a very close friendship with Paulo. I grew up by his house, and I was one of the kids that play in that house that Guilherme mentioned. And throughout my career, once I decided to be an architect, Paulo Mendes da Rocha was always our teacher and a close person to my career. And domestic, because I'm not talking through a historical or critical perspective. I am over the draft board. I'm drawing, I have a practice. So when I look to Paulo's work, I cannot stop myself to ask the question, how does he do it? I'm always surprised and amazed from his process. And then that's why I started to studying, and then brought me to organizing his archives. And then in 2020, he invited me to do this humongous task to bring the archives to Portugal. He didn't tell me that he was going to leave us the year after. So I'm very grateful that Jean-Louis and Vanessa and the whole team that he summoned up somehow, Guilherme and many, many friends and La Casa da Arquitectura are joining together to summon up and to do this great adventure that is bringing these archives to the world. So I'm starting with my presentation by showing you a little bit where Paulo did all these projects, and then how his tools, which tools, excuse me, he did it. Guilherme brought the figure of bricoleur, and I think he's absolutely right. Paulo was always gathering stones and sticks and papers and wires, and he was managing his works in this office. He is part of his office, and you can see is not a very clean, and he didn't like to have like a white and posh office. His office was a little bit of a mess, but it was full of I don't know if you can see my mouse here, with little objects that he was playing in his everyday life.
You're not sharing your screen yet.
Please share.
Yeah, we can see all of you, but not your screen.
Sorry. Wait. So start again.
You can share screen.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. We see the first one. Yes.
So here's the first picture. So this is one of the models of the boats that he did to start modeling his project from Theatre of Victoria, the Museum and Theatre of Victoria. But this is a feel of his place of work. This is the place where he sits. He used to sit every day and think and do little naps in the afternoon. And you can see in the back of the picture, the projects that he did in paper, and also in the left pictures, some stones and sticks that he would gather normally in his walks from his house to the office. This is his tables, and there are little sculptures and papers folded, and books that he was reading many at the same time. Jean-Louis could do in his visit here, he could do a very good view of these books, and perhaps he's going to tell us a little bit more about those, the way Paulo read those books. But Paulo was a man with busy hands. He was always doing things with his hands with simple materials, and wire and paper and stones, a little bit like Tom Jobim's songs, Waters of March. And those are some of these little pieces that he made. On the left, we can see there is this is the model for theater piece, and you can tell this is always things that he could find easily in his office. Those are the famous paper models. They were always over the archiving, how do you call that, mapotecas, but they were part of this space. And in the back, you could see the blackboard, which Ciro showed you the design of Fiesp. This was designed in this green blackboard. And also this is some little models. Paulo, for me, was important in his process is more than choosing a tool or a way. He had always a good strategy that combines technique and poetics. So these projects, they could be done in this first strategy, either in drawing or model, or in his later works, talking. He was a very good storyteller, and then we could spend hours and hours in his office, and he could tell you a new project just by narrating or telling you how he was going to build, and you could imagine how the architect could emerge from this imagination. And it helps that he was a very, very funny man. I think Guilherme can agree with me on that. This is what the model of Victoria, it's one of his main projects done in the 2000, and this is unbuilt yet. It's half of the construction is built. We've been there with Vanessa and Jean-Louis, and the first thing he's decided to do in this model was the boats. So he did all the big boats and the small boats, and you can see on the left part is the channel of Victoria, and in the right part you can see the three buildings that are part of this conception: the museum in the first plane, in the back the theater, and on the right side the administration board building. So he was playing with these buildings for weeks. Sometimes he was putting the administration buildings near to the water, and he was playing with the three figures a lot. And I remember one day I was there it was a Friday, and I knew the cleaning lady was coming on Saturday, and Paulo decided to do this. He changes everything. He put the theater on one place, and he put the museum on the other place. And when I came on Monday, everything was upside down. So I said, oh, the cleaning lady must have been trying to clean this, and she didn't know how to put it. So I was afraid to meet Paulo on that day. And finally he told me, no, I change everything on Sunday. So he was not, when you see his drawings, you think he's like, the idea comes like that, like a miracle, but it's not. He was a very hard labor. He was drawing and drawing and drawing many, many times the same object. This is one of the models of the museums of the University of São Paulo. It's from the late 90s too. And there's a museum of anthropology, zoology, and an amphitheater. And this is very beautiful because it comes from a series of models that Paulo was doing, where always you have this main structure like a street, and all the buildings were organizing along that street. And here is one of his drawing drawers, I'm sorry, where you can find all the papers and the drawings and his production. And what I found out is that Paulo, as you can imagine, was not an analogical, digital man. He was very analogical. He was everything he noted in paper. So when he started a house, for instance, this house in 81, the telephone of the person, everything he decided to be that was important for this project was in the same paper. So here you can tell that he was managing at the same time the plan and the section, right? So in the section you can tell the voids and the sun where it's coming, the swimming pools, and the plan, also how this two bearing walls could compress and organize all the spaces from the house. So from that point to the shop drawings, there was a sort of a short way, because everything was decided and ready in that piece of paper. This is another one. Paulo was a very good swimming pool drawer, I think. I enjoy a lot his swimming pools. They were very beautiful. And this is another house. And so you can tell there is color pencils and the colors that he liked, pink and blue, very simple, not sophisticated as a tool, but very sophisticated in what contained it. So that's, as a project design teacher today, I cannot be very happy with all these digital tools. I think we are missing something, but this is something for another talk. So he also kept designing his furniture. We have found many furniture sketches in his office, and it was something he liked a lot. He had many types of chairs, and luckily at the Sesc 24 de Maio, he was able to gather all these drawings and put in one beautiful collection that you can see that is in Sesc 24 de Maio. And also he kept writing on paper all his memoir, the memoirs for the projects, the letters, everything he wrote in paper. And there was a secretary who passes through the machine, and he was rewriting over it. And on the left side, we can tell this is a very beautiful piece. It's Flávio Motta's memorial for the Brazilian pavilion of Osaka, and Paulo's correction. He was correcting some terms and precising some of the text of Paulo Motta. And then on the right side, also his handwriting, that was very beautiful too, like a drawing. And he kept doing even his emails, he wrote by somebody to the computer. Here was his Google schedule. He didn't have he didn't have cell phones or iPads or anything. He wrote everything on paper. And here are some drawings that I brought very quickly. I think Ciro and Guy and Guilherme showed a little bit about his work. So, but just to tell you a little bit how those drawings, they had the precision and the strategy inside them in the very beginning. And for us architects, this is very impressive, how with such a few lines, you can define such a complex structure. We've been in this structure with Guy and Jean-Louis, and we were together, we were talking about how complex this Paulistano structure is. And then in this drawing, you can tell that everything is decided already, and it was built like that, but it's very complex. And last week we were at Casa da Arquitectura talking about the model of this piece, and it was like it took you almost 1 hour to explain how this structure works for the modelist. So this is the Paulistano you've seen, and how those pieces are together, and how the cables and the concrete, they work together. And in this lower piece where are the bathrooms and the academy, the gymnasium spaces, you can tell how Paulo is manipulating also the floor, the line that Ciro was talking about. So in that drawing before, everything was there already. So this is the construction. We always show the construction pictures for the students. This is, I'm telling for the students, because after that, the club decided to remodel this space, and it's awful today. So luckily, there are some associates that are doing some, they decided to bring the gymnasium to the original design. So they are remodeling that. So that's why we always show old pictures of this space for you. So this is another view. You can tell it's very complex space, because you have many levels, you have many structures working together, and you have the ground floor, and inside there is a gymnasium for 800 people, and how all these activities work together is very interesting. I'm sorry. So this is the house of Paulo Mendes da Rocha. We talked about that house the whole morning. And this is a typical house that was done in section first. So Paulo manipulated as Osaka, the ground floor. This piece here didn't exist. This piece of land didn't exist. So Paulo carved like a hole in the land to put this house. And when you look from outside, it looks like a house that is floating in the air. So those are some of the construction. So you can tell from this drawing to this construction how complex it is. They have many surfaces that they are not in the same plane. You have the light, how the light plays, how the shadow makes a drawing in the concrete, and it's very difficult to manage all those things together at the same time. So this is a picture a little bit with Guilherme was talking about. The furniture was made at the same time as the construction. And here you can see this, the two houses, and the little house, the little house in the back was the house of where my parents lived. And this is another house, the Milan house, and it's a very difficult house to be in because it is a house that was made from inside out. You cannot see anything from the outside, and I think it's one of the most difficult and different houses of Paulo Mendes da Rocha. The stairs also are big pieces of jewelry that he used to do. And this is Casa Junqueira. I think this is this is the last house of this series of concrete house. This is the house that in some senses ends this what we can tell Paulista phase. And after that house, Paulo started to do, he did the MUBI, he did some housing buildings. It's almost the end of an era, this house. But you can tell in the model, in the plan, in this drawing, that what he wanted most. This is the library of the house. It was this view from the library to Jaraguá, which is one of the few mountains we have here, like a landscape icon for us. So he wanted from the library to see this mountain. And so all this plan was made for that. The inflections and the spaces between the bearing walls and this box that is floating in the middle. This is like a development of these drawings. And it's very interesting to see that from the first drawings to the last drawings, there are very little changes. Very few changes, I'm sorry. So this is a picture of this house, how this box floats in the middle, and you have this space, the exact amount of space needed to the light to reflect in this bearing wall. It was a huge library from a lawyer, and so it was not a good idea to have the sun hitting directing the books, so he decided to do this reflection lights and also the inflection to see the mountains from the side. This is the back view of the house, and this is the garden of the house, and this is the entrance. Another stair. So from that point, we're talking about around 70s, 74. In the 90s, he and answering a little bit the question about how he managed to enter the new era of norms and legislations. This project for me is iconic because it's Poupa Tempo is a place where people can come and do their papers, like birth certificates, driver's license, everything. You can solve your life in these places, and you can imagine in Brazil with such a big population, this is a very big problem for us. So they invented this Poupa Tempo, where you can save time. The translation is save time. So there are huge structures that receives 10,000 people a week to do their papers. And this project Paulo did with steel and concrete. And you can tell that these drawings, he decides how is going to be built the structure. So on the right side, you can see the subway station. He decided to do this project by the subway station and the train station. The governor at the time wanted to do this equipment in a very prestigious lot in the city with lots of trees, but people had to come by cars. And Paulo said, this is not a good idea. We should build by the subway. So the government had to sell the lot and buy this lot that Paulo decided to build, and it was built as such, like a train station though. So the concrete pillars came first, and then they were built as a precast concrete, and at the end you could do, they brought the steel frames that only had that pause gently in the concrete structure. I think this is the first time that Paulo begins to draw with steel, because before steel was like used as a secondary structure, especially in the expression of architecture. And here, after Poupatempo, I think Paulo begins to, I think he's able to be a little bit more poetic with steel, which is very, very hard, because as we know, concrete is very gentle. We can do everything we want. It's like a liquid stone. So steel is harder to bring, to be expressive in steel, especially from a Paulista point of view. So this is the structure right after it was inaugurated. It's a very successful place, and you can tell like the finishes are very rough. The windows are not as beautiful as his houses, but they have the same effect. Like it's very light and doesn't have any. The vertical lines are not very expressive if you compare to the other lines of the building. And also in the front part, you can see this is the water, the rain water, I don't know how to say in English, the rain water conductors, which normally are pieces of steel with 10 centimeters. And so Paulo decided to design a sculpture to conduct the rainwaters from the roof to the ground. And so this is a little bit what Guilherme was talking about, is the ludens, right? So this pavilion is like 22 meters by 100, but with the water, the rainwater, he decided to play a little bit and just, it looks like a paper cut and with glue, and just put there as a playful gesture. This is another view of the structure. And that's it. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kate. This was a great final statement and a great first-hand account. So I open the floor for questions, comments. Yes.
Hello, I have a question maybe for Catherine, and sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Guilherme. Yes. I'm from a poor city, Ningbo, and I've grown up in the city. And when I was reading the interview with Mendes da Rocha, one sentence that he said was so beautiful that stayed in my head was, "You are born in a place to build it because it's never ready." And I think he also spent a lot of time or a lot of energy talking about this project that he never get to realize Tietê Port City. And I really wanted to know how he personally talked to you guys about this, personal unrealized dreams in a way. And we know that this project in for him is very, very essential at the end of his career. So I want to know more about it, and then what's his personal recount, and because also, Catherine, that you mentioned that the idea that he can just tell the idea of architecture, he can just talk about a building and then it kind of realizes in your head. So I really am curious about that part.
Okay, Guilherme.
Yes, sorry, I didn't understand of which project you are mentioning that it was not realized.
Cidade do Tietê.
Okay. Yes, it was a moment in the early 80s when the government of the state of São Paulo decided to build a new capital. But we were living during the dictatorship period. So transferring the capital from São Paulo to the interior was not a good idea in Paulo Mendes da Rocha's opinion, considering, for example, the example of Brasília and what happened to Brazil moving the capital from Rio towards the interior. But Paulo accepted the challenge and took this occasion to propose not a capital, but an exemplar new city, which would be a city to increase or to develop the fluvial system, or the system of transportation of goods through river. We should remember that at that time the train transport system in Brazil was almost destroyed by trucks and by highways and roads, and of course the system of transport by boats also. So this project of this city is a statement, not for a city exactly, but more for this comprehension of the territory and the idea to create a city as a new pole for developing fluvial systems of transportations connected to train system transportations, and so that the city was more an arrangement of buildings and spaces to do an eloge or to put the statement of this territory of America, because it was in the way the Tietê River crosses São Paulo city and goes through direction of Paraná River and goes down to Rio de la Plata, to Argentina and Uruguay. So putting a city there is more a strategy to connect São Paulo to the hinterland and to show us the possibility of interiorization of the country. So connecting Brazil with Uruguay and Paraguay and Argentina, for example, because when we I think I had the opportunity to talk about this with Jean-Louis and Vanessa and Kate once, having the opportunity to editing the book of interviews of Paulo and doing trying to find some words. I try to find the word Brazil in the interviews, and we don't find it. We only find America. And it's very nice to see. And Cidade do Tietê is exactly that.
Yeah, I think just to complement a little bit, I think what Paulo taught us is that architecture doesn't have to come from something new, like the empty board. Like, so this, the way of him not being a modern anymore, because he said that architecture has the quality to be exemplary. You don't need to do many things in an architecture design. It has just to show, like a beacon, some lights and where to go. And architecture is not definitive. So he said that what is important is that you have your stone and you settle the stone in some place, and then somebody else pick up this stone and move forward. And it is very beautiful, and especially when you are a student, because it gives you hope, right? Because nobody is going to say the last word. And so he liked to think of his architecture of something of transitory, of something being transitory, something that is going to be changed for the others. And when he realizes that in the industry could not solve all the miseries, in the 60s, by when Guilherme told you about this project, he understood the importance of being exemplary. For example, like this. And so this is very open and then very generous for me discourse.
Jean-Louis has a question.
Yes, I have a question for Ciro and Guy. I'm struck by one aspect of Paulo's work, which makes me think of Le Corbusier at La Tourette. Le Corbusier's project at La Tourette is built from the top down. He established the level of a roof, and then the block touches the ground wherever it is possible. So I have a feeling that many of Paulo's projects are not conceived the way architects work usually, which is by building from the ground up, but built from the roof down. What do you think of this very elementary idea?
You go first.
Ciro.
Ciro is laughing, so.
No, I go, Guilherme, you start.
Oh, you mute.
Yes, sorry. I think the question is to you, Ciro, and to Guy, who is there, no? Or it's to me?
I think
You want to say something here?
Guilherme, you want to say something, or we should?
I'm thinking.
You can say something.
Okay. So I think that, I mean, the whole idea that Ciro was presenting of the relationship to the section, I think is the same in a way that the line of the horizon, or the line in the city plan that Kate you were showing, that goes horizontally through that model, is a datum that really does start up high and then meets the ground wherever the ground happens to be, which, if you think about, as you pointed out, the topography of Sao Paulo, the topography of Rio, you know, it is the way that you can start a project, right? You start with a horizontal line that you situate in some manner that is appropriate. And then you come down to the ground and you meet the ground. It also feels that it's a relationship to the land that is light, that is gentle, right? So in all respects, I think that it engages the section, it engages a particular relationship to the landscape and to nature. And you're right, it is something that ties back to La Tourette, but only because La Tourette ties back to a hilly landscape. And that's the right way to go, it seems to be, when you're operating in that kind of environment.
Any thoughts about it, Ciro and Guilherme?
Yes, I'm not sure about La Tourette because I've never been there. I just saw photos and drawings, but it makes sense what you were talking about, Jean-Louis and Guy. And I was thinking that if we think about not La Tourette, but the other Le Corbusier, Villa Savoie, for example, is the classical suspension of the volume. So it's like a classical building with the square that you put in the air. So you suspend it from the ground to the air. And this is the opposite of what Paulo does. So from this sense, I agree that comes from above, like the rock of Magritte. And since it comes from above, the section it designs the land. So like in Mubi's section, it's not a suspension of a classical volume, it's more a construction of the site with the building altogether.
I think, but no, there is a very important architectural operator which is existing also in the architecture of Niemeyer. It is the ramp. And here we're brought back to Villa Savoie and the section of Villa Savoie, which is more important than the plan. But there's a section published in Le Corbusier's complete works in 1930, which has a very simple slogan: stairs divide, a ramp unites. I think for me, it's a very clear key to what Ciro has discussed and what you were saying. From top down or from ground up, but with the ramps as a, and this is where Artigas also developed these ideas. So I think we have to see a sort of field of tension between these early modern ideas and the way they were reformulated, diverted, reinterpreted in the context of Brazil.
I think we also read a very nice passage from Annette Spiro's text introducing the book on Paulo Mendes da Rocha's works, where she, I mean, we read with the students, where she said that in Paulo's, if you take a building and separate it from the land, you only have fragments. So it's something that you cannot, you know, it doesn't really, you cannot just leave the building and it exists as such. That if you separate it from the land, it's just fragments. So it's, I think, has to do with what you just said, Jean-Louis, about designing the landscape and not being dependent from it. You can't separate it.
And sorry, I continue. But and if you go back to Artigas, Artigas sometimes took some of these ideas from Perret. Some of the aphorisms of Artigas. Architecture, for instance, is one he uses. Architecture is the art of letting the supporting point sink. This is a translation from Perret.
Yeah.
And I think that for that generation, Perret's work was very present because he built a museum, the Penteado Foundation in São Paulo in 1952. So when Paulo was going to school, the site of Perret was just next door. And of course, he could not have missed it, being a young student in architecture. And Perret had a very interesting concept. And I'm curious to see if it has been explicitly taken up or simply assimilated. This concept was in French called the l'abri souverain, the sovereign shelter. The idea that great architecture, in particular public architecture, was about building a shelter, a big shelter underneath which then life would be organized. And when I look at both Artigas and Paulo's work, I'm really reminded of this position. So was it subconscious? Was it a convergence? Was it an assimilation of that idea? I'm really wondering about.
Difficult to know. What do you think, Kate? I didn't know this this definition of shelter by Perret. I never heard Paulo talking anything about this, and here I only heard he talking about bullshits about Perret because of this FAP building. Yeah, but of course, Artigas, you're right. He had this inspiration in Perret, but maybe because of the prize, because he won the Perret prize in the end of his life, and maybe this quotation of Perret was done in the context of this Perret prize Artigas won. Yes. But
possibly one has to check.
But
I know
Yeah.
with São Paulo, just not to fetishize it, it has a symmetrical plan. It is built as a big palace in concrete, so it's the ambiguity of Perret. The concept is interesting, but then the implementation is made with the kind of language everyone liked to hate among the Brazilian modernists. So it's a very ambiguous subject.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a very interesting discussion. I'm like Guilherme, I've never seen Paulo talking about Perret, but I think the notion of object is not something we can put, for me, we cannot read Paulo's work with the notion of object. I think when President Guy showed us the movie, you can tell it's a manipulation of the land and places, plans and surfaces. So this is the manipulation of pieces and not objects. So which is striking is that in Paulo's work, one piece makes have so many functions. For instance, one of the walls that you can see in Butantan is a wall, and it's something that captures the water from the roof, and it's a window, everything in the same piece, concrete piece. So this is, I think we can talk more about pieces, surfaces, than object, which is Niemeyer. For instance, Niemeyer, he says, he draws a line and there is an object. Paulo, he draws like a horizon, and then what's inside is the manipulation of the lines, of the levels, I'm sorry.
Well, it's also that, especially in Mube, that line creates a space where gravitation is reversed almost.
Yeah,
That you're in this zone where you almost can float upward and downward through all these spaces.
Maybe we already we are 1 hour late, so we need to go see the proposed models for the exhibition. So unfortunately, we cannot show them here, but we get to see them soon. And well, I think we call it a day. Thank you so much for your participation, and this dialogue is very important since the beginning. And thank you for those of you who are at home, and for those of you who are here in real life for sticking to this conversation. And yeah.
Thank you.